Welcome to another Jew and Gentile podcast. I am your host, Chris Katulka, and with me is none other than the Jewish sage himself, the one, the only Mr. Steve Herzig. Hello, Steve. How are you?
I am doing good, but this is a special one, Chris.
This is a special podcast. We have a special guest. We're coming on early this week because Israel was attacked this weekend by Iran. We wanted to highlight you with some of the information that's coming out of Israel. We have a special guest, Elliot Chodoff, who lives in Israel, and I'm going to share with you his resume in a moment. But it's really important for Steve and I to share with you our thoughts about what's going on in Israel and to hear from a special guest. So hang on one moment. Here we go. Well, welcome in. Everybody, I'm going to go ahead right now and turn right to our special guest, Elliot Chodoff. I've heard Elliot, Steve, many times at our conferences.
Number of conferences he's been at. Yep.
For Friends of Israel. I've heard him in Israel during our tours, our Up to Jerusalem tours. Elliot has served in the IDF for more than 35 years. He was a co-director of the Fieldcraft Project in the Office of Chief of Doctrine.
Chris, he founded a community. He birthed a community
in Israel. And Infantry and Paratroopers. He co-authored the Fieldcraft Manual and taught courses in Fieldcraft and Tactics and Infantry and Special Forces.
A definite top 10 seller.
100%. I could go on and on and on. He completed his PhD in Political Science at Bar Ilan University. Elliot, I mean, we could go on forever with your resume here.
Please don't.
Elliot, I'm thankful that you took the time to join us on short notice of what's going on in Israel right now after Iran attacked Israel 2 days ago. From your perspective, you're sitting there right now. You experienced it. Give us an update.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand the war didn't begin this week. We've been at war with Iran since Ayatollah Khomeini called for our destruction in even before 1979. But since he came to power, at least, and things haven't changed in the sort of overall status. What's changed is the intensity. We've gone from, I would say, the war of shadows, a war of proxies, a war of agents, to this week a direct attack by Iran from Iranian soil on Israel, and an attack that was not symbolic. This was the largest attack of its type, 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles in history, basically, of this type. So we're talking about a global scale assault, which obviously failed, but it's not no blood, no foul. They really took the shot, and they meant for it to succeed.
Elliot, can you tell me? We were hearing information on this side of the pond in America that Iran could strike Israel within 48 hours. They had some information that was coming. What information was reliable for Israel, and what things surprised Israel during the attack?
Look, from a military point of view, there were no surprises. Iran, first of all, used everything that it has in its arsenal in terms of quality. They didn't use everything that they have in terms of quantity. But and all things that we were aware of, as I said, the drones we've seen being used by Hezbollah. We've seen them being used by the Houthis. The Ukrainians have seen them being used by the Russians. These are all Iranian drones. Cruise missiles are relatively old technology, although still very effective, and we knew that they had them, and we knew that they had ballistic missiles. So on that level, there was no surprise. Mm-hmm. The 48 hours notice, intelligence has been watching them very closely. The whole question of is intelligence going to be accurate in its prediction is something you only know in retrospect. But an attack on this scale is very, very hard to do secretly if you have intelligence services watching you closely. In other words, just to sort of go to the other end of the spectrum, Hezbollah or even Hamas can launch 3 rockets or 6 rockets with no advance notice. You can't launch 300 missiles just by pressing a button.
Yeah.
There's got to be a lot of preparation done for that and all of that, and that sends all sorts of messages to intelligence services.
Did they expect, my question too was, I know they expected the Iranians to send, missiles from Iran, but did they anticipate Syria? Did they anticipate Iraq? Did Israel see those coming as well?
absolutely. And there were 100 rockets fired by Hezbollah that nobody's talking about, in addition to all of that in the same evening. Look, that's all stuff that the system is prepared for in perpetuity. The large sort of the qualitative shift was the fact that such a large number were fired, and they were fired from Iran.
Steve, go ahead. I don't want to.
Just a question about the way Western countries kind of mobilized with Israel. I was very. I mean, I thought that was amazing. France, the U.S., Jordan, UK. Who was coordinating? Was that done from Israel, the headquarters, with them? How was that worked out?
Okay, so the direct coordination was between Israel and the United States through CENTCOM, which we have very, very close relations with militarily. And here also, I think it's important to understand the Israeli-American relationship on an institutional level is not directly connected to the day-to-day Biden likes Bibi or hates Bibi and vice versa that you're going to see in the news. This is a deeper, ongoing, long-going relationship.
That's really good news.
Of course, we end it.
That's good news.
Yeah. And what I was about to say is that, yes, a president could give the order, end it, but that would be an extreme case that would be damaging to both sides. So that's ongoing. And once this became clear, and it became clear what scale it was going to be on, America actually backtracked. Immediately after our attack on the Quds Force leadership in Damascus, the first response from the administration was publicly, we had nothing to do with it. It was all Israel, and essentially a message to Iran, leave us alone. Now, Iran read that as a green light, go ahead and hit Israel, we don't care, which was not the intention of the administration statement, but that was the consequence.
Which administration? Are you talking about the Biden administration?
Yes.
So I didn't realize the Biden administration. Are you saying they had a participation in the attack against the
No.
No? Okay.
No, but by stating it, they could have just kept their mouths shut.
I see.
Okay, but by publicly stating and calling Iran directly and saying, hey, it wasn't us, they're basically saying, or it could be understood between the lines, do whatever you want to Israel, just leave us out of it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's what the Iranians understood from it. Again, I'm not convinced that was the intention, but it was the consequence. And once the United States realized that was the consequence, keeping in mind that had this strike been successful in any way, and of course it was a total failure from the Iranian perspective, in part because of the support, in part because America stepped in not only with Britain and France, but also Jordan. Israel was allowed to operate freely in Jordanian airspace, all of which helped a great deal. Had there been a successful strike against Israel, the Israeli response would have been heavy and automatic. And at that point, we would have had a regional war going on. Now, Israel, and I think this is also important to state, even if Israel never threatens this publicly, all reports about Israel's nuclear capability are off the record, and we don't admit to anything. But foreign sources say that Israel has at least 200 nuclear warheads. The last thing an America wants is Israel with its back to the wall saying, okay, we have no other options. So those are all parts of the complex of decision making, in addition to the fact that America truly is a friend of Israel. Again, leaving the vagaries of the immediate administration's liking or disliking the current prime minister.
Elliot, can you? This one fascinated me. I was in Tampa this weekend, and we're hearing news Friday, Saturday. It could happen at any moment, and then all of a sudden they launch a drone that takes 8 hours to get from Tehran or wherever in Iraq or Iran down to Israel. This is like a guy threatening to punch you. And he says, but I'm going to get you in a couple hours, and I'm going to move slow motion. Okay, what are they saying by launching a drone that takes 8 hours to get to Israel?
If it were a drone, then it would be meaningless. But if it's 200 drones, then it's not so meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
And here you have to understand the impact of the Iranian strike, or the potential impact, was not in the drone itself, because we're facing single drones. As a matter of fact, as we're speaking now, I had an alert flash up on my screen of a threatened drone attack about 40 kilometers, 25 miles from where I'm sitting.
Wow.
Coming out of Lebanon. That's a daily occurrence. But a couple of hundred of them is a whole different story, because now you're stressing the entire air defense system. And frankly, I have to tell you, I can't say I'm shocked, but I'm pleasantly surprised that an attack that included over 300 missiles of one type or another, drones, cruise missiles and ballistic, only 2 hit Israel. And both of them landed in an Air Force base in the Negev and did negligible damage. That's an astounding success rate, beyond what anything we would anticipate normally, even from the superb Air Force and air defense system that Israel has.
Mm-hmm.
Which, Elliot, the thing that concerns me, well, there's a lot of things, but one of the main things is how every day this kind of thing goes on, mostly through proxies. This is the first time Iran from their soil. But how long can Israel, with 100,000 Israelis living down further south, abandoning their homes for safety reasons, yes, the Iranians must be joyous that they're keeping Israel from operating normally. How long can that go on?
It can't go on very long. Here we have to remember that Israel is fighting a multi-front war, and even superpowers, take the United States in World War II, was fighting in two theaters, but the decision was made Europe first. In other words, you can't simultaneously fight at full strength in multiple theaters, even if you're the United States of America, certainly not if you're Israel. So Gaza is the first priority, and we're not done there yet. Lebanon, Hezbollah is the next priority, and that speaks directly to your point of the roughly 100,000 Israelis from the north who are internal refugees in Israel who can't go back home. Here I just got another flash of rockets from Lebanon. This is an ongoing occurrence. Now, we could fight Hezbollah and Hamas simultaneously if we had to, but that's not the optimal situation. It divides the Air Force, it divides artillery support, it divides logistics. It's something that if you have the choice, you don't do. And also, a war in Lebanon will be very different in nature from the war that's been going on in Gaza. It's going to require a lot more maneuver, a lot more deep maneuver, and that means that we're going to preferably wait until the weather is completely clear and dry. They're predicting showers this afternoon. Showers means mud, and mud means restricted movement for tanks and other types of armored vehicles. So I'm looking at May, June. That's not a prediction. It's a from where I'm sitting kind of thing. For us to move into Lebanon against Hezbollah, unless they wake up one morning and say, "Oh, this is all a big mistake. We're giving up on it." I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Elliot, recently after what happened and the success that Israel had, and I saw a picture too, Elliot, of one of the missiles that Iran sent over. Right. One had landed, I guess, in the Dead Sea, and it's a picture of a man standing next to it. And this isn't
It's huge.
It's huge. This is not one of the rockets that was launched by Hamas. No. This is a tree trunk. I mean, the thing's got to be 20
That's a
feet
ballistic
long.
Missile, yes.
Ballistic missile. It's huge. So the threat is real, and Israel did a fantastic job defending itself. But I'm wondering, the Biden administration and Biden himself recently said the phrase, I believe, "take the win, Israel," which means don't respond in kind. And I'm interested, what are the Israelis thinking about that? I don't want to go to the Knesset yet. What do the Israelis think about the phrase, "take the win"?
So there's a huge mix that, Israel. Golda Meir famously said that she was the head of a country of 2.5 million prime ministers.
That's
so,
good.
Everybody's got an opinion, and it ranges from take the win to go and really rip into them, teach them a lesson, and that sort of thing. By the way, that opinion is divided within the government, within the military, between the government and the military. There are all sorts of different views on it, and they're all valid. I have a slightly different perspective on it, I think, and it's one that I have been thinking about since the strike the other day, and that is that I don't think we should retaliate. As a matter of fact, I'm writing an article about that now. Not that we shouldn't respond, but we shouldn't retaliate. In other words, what's happened, in my opinion, is that we have gone through a transition that is only slowly being appreciated in the leadership. And that is, we've gone from this, what I call the war of shadows and the war of proxies, to open warfare.
Yeah.
And, okay, Israeli deterrence failed totally the night of the attack. Okay, and that's an important thing to realize also. This wasn't a breakdown that needs to be strengthened. Total failure. And I don't say that critically, I say it analytically. Anybody who fires 300 missiles at you is not deterred.
Mm-hmm.
And they took into account in the firing of the missiles that we could retaliate, and that didn't deter them either. So I believe we're past that stage. And we're now in an open warfare stage. Where in open warfare, you don't retaliate. In open warfare, you think of a strategy of victory. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. I do know what it means conceptually. And that is that you don't say, okay, they did this, and now we're going to do that back to them and see what happens. And that's what retaliation is about.
Can I ask, Elliot, before you continue, when you say deterrence, I'm interested. Was it Israel's job to deter Iran, or was it the West's job to deter Iran?
So the answer to that is both. But whoever's job it was, it all failed.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, Israel has its own need for deterrence. Frankly, we don't have very much. We've got some. We have some partial, but in terms of where Iran is now vis-a-vis Israel, we have none. And we shouldn't try to rebuild it because we're way past that point. Mm-hmm. Okay, here again, to use a World War II analogy, there might have been some sort of deterrence play going on between the European countries and the Germans right up until the invasion of Poland. At that point, deterrence was over. It was World War II. And here, I don't want to use the same kind of scale, but it's the same kind of threshold, the same kind of line has been crossed. When you're at war, first of all, retaliation is a really bad strategy because it allows your enemy to dictate the terms of initiative. In other words, you're just responding to them. Mm-hmm. And that's a really bad two-step to get into. They do, and then you do back to them, and then they do, and you do back to them. It's much smarter to say, stop, okay, they did this to us. Now what do we need to do in order to win this?
I heard Michael Oren, who's former ambassador to the United States, yes. And I know you know him. He was on a show, and he gave three main points as to his recommendations, and I'd like you to respond to them. The first one was, he said, Israel should do three things. One, Israel should mount an international diplomatic effort to galvanize a front against Iran. What do you think of that?
100% agree.
Okay, that makes sense to me. What are the possibilities of doing that in light of the attack?
That depends on how Israel responds, and that comes back to the early point. Whether I agree with the Biden statement, take the win, or basically, take your marbles and go home, America is key to a global alliance, confederation, whatever, against Iran. and that's an asset. It's capital that you don't squander. And here, with that, before you get to his other 2 points, a symbolic strike against Iran, because it would only be symbolic. In other words, even if it takes out an air base in Iran, that's symbolic. That's not crippling. A symbolic strike against Iran, in my opinion, is not worth the price of losing that coalition.
Gotcha. The second thing he said that I really relate to, as far as a Jewish American here, is change the rules of the game. He said, I can't stress enough, for the last 15 to 20 years, the United States, Israel, we've all been playing by Iranian rules. What are those rules? Iran should get its proxies to shoot at us. We shoot back at the proxies. And for Israel, it's a terrible game because the proxies hide their civilian population, and we get branded as war criminals. So changing the rules of the game, what would Israel have to do to change those rules?
So once again, think not in terms of tit-for-tat retaliation. Upgrade the thinking to strategic, to grand strategic, and I can't give you a specific answer because, frankly, I haven't given it that much deep consideration until the past 24 hours either. And I don't think anybody here really has, in the leadership. I think the leadership has also been in this back and forth. They do to us, so we'll do back to them, and try to maintain some sort of calm level of status quo. This is what we were doing against Hamas until October 7th. And I think there's a paradigm shift that needs to be made here. And here, once again, I agree 100% with Michael, but that includes stopping and thinking, how do we defeat not each of them piecemeal, but ultimately all of them together, with Iran being the head of the snake.
Mm-hmm. The third point, and you already said deterrence, it didn't work. He said maintain deterrence, but also go on the offensive. And then he said something that both Chris and I, it resonated with us. Defense is not deterrence. How do you respond to that?
So absolutely correct. First of all, defense is not deterrence. Defense is what happens when deterrence fails. If you have deterrence, you don't have to defend. You've convinced them not to attack you.
Gotcha.
Okay. Here I'll respectfully disagree with Michael, and deterrence is one of my fields. It's one that I've studied deeply, from nuclear deterrence through deterrence of terrorist organizations. Deterrence can work. It's not working here. It's gone. And it will take, we're way too far down the road in this war to go back to a deterrence regime or relationship with, after what Hamas did on October 7th, forget about deterring Hamas. That train has left the station. We're not deterring Hezbollah. They're devastating the communities along the border of northern Israel. The population isn't there, but the physical destruction is massive. They're firing rockets, anti-tank missiles, constantly on a daily basis. So we're not deterring them. And Iran clearly is not deterred. So let's not kid ourselves. We're not deterring. We're now in a phase of defense for the most part, except against Hamas, although we're a bit of a pause there. But the way to win is not by defending. The way to win is by attacking. And that's ultimately what I believe we're going to have to do with Hezbollah and also with Iran.
Put on your virtual hat, Elliot, if you will. Put it on. And what kinds of discussions are going on in the cabinet, the war cabinet? I personally would just love to see it, just to hear them talk back and forth, all the different ideas going on. Give us your opinion as to what that atmosphere is like.
So I think that they're juggling all of these things. Do you listen to America? Don't you listen to America? Do we strike back? Don't we strike back? Keeping in mind that the war cabinet includes three generals, two of them former chiefs of staff. A third one, Gallant, was appointed chief of staff and then not permitted to serve in office for a whole bunch of legal reasons. These are people who know the business. There's the actual chief of staff of the IDF. So all of that's going on in terms of what are our priorities, how much of our capabilities do we use here, and do we listen to the Americans, the Brits, the French, and all those people who are saying don't do it? And to some extent, they're saying don't do it, I think is prodding us more in the direction of doing it, even though, like I said, I think it's a mistake, not because we have to listen to them, but because I think broader strategic thinking, provided that it's there, and I have to make that assumption, would say, think long-term, think more complex, the coalition is important, and simply slapping Iran just to show them that you can, it's too late in the game for that. We have to think much, much more decisively.
One more question, and I'll turn it over to you, Chris. But the average Israeli, it always amazes me that when the restrictions were lifted, there was at least reports flocking back into the streets, normal activity. The resiliency of the Israelis is just always amazing to me. They adjust very quickly.
I saw one group of ladies doing Zumba this morning or something like that.
Hey,
you know?
The show must go on. But
right.
From here in the United States, we've become so frightened of these kinds of things, and the average Israeli has lived with them their whole life. So this is nothing new. Just if you can't comment about there's just the tenor of the average citizen.
It's a few things. First of all, we've lived with it for a long time. Second, we've got a population with a huge amount of military and combat experience. And I'm among many, many, many. I hear artillery fire from my house. I hear rockets incoming. And our basic joke is, if you hear the boom, you're okay. Let's keep doing whatever it is we're doing.
And if you don't hear the boom, then there's another problem. You know?
Then it's too late.
Yeah.
But and on top of that, if we're going to let them make us miserable, they win.
Mm-hmm. Elliot, the thing that struck me was number one, Jordan and its participation in helping to defend not only its own country, but also Israel in helping its own country. I didn't realize this, Elliot, but Iran is trying to influence Jordan. And it seems like that's been going on for a while now. A 12,000 person militia in Jordan. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to have to excuse myself for a second. My battery burned down much faster than I expected. So let me grab a plug and come back to you in a second.
You go right ahead. Yep, go right ahead. You do that, and Steve and I will talk. Steve, I was fascinated when Jordan, out of nowhere is helping to defend Israel, defending itself, but then at the same time, it has to deal with Iran. And I never thought about that Jordanian-Iranian issue that was going on.
There's always been an informal Jordanian-Israeli connection. It's always has to be under the radar, but it's always been going on. And I think the leadership in Jordan is concerned about Iran, has been concerned. That's why Saudi Arabia even helped Israel as they've been negotiating since the Abraham Accords, etc. We know whose political side they actually are on, but they have to. It's a balance, isn't it, Chris?
It is, and I know after 1979, with the Islamic Revolution that came in through with the Ayatollahs in Iran, what they did was they tried to influence the Middle East around them. They tried to begin to, they looked at places like Lebanon. They said this place is too secular, and so they started sending their mercenaries down there, and sure enough, before you know it, you have Hezbollah, which influenced itself, and the same with Hamas. And so it's interesting because Iran is not comfortable simply sitting still. They are constantly trying to influence Middle East politics and the Middle East way of life. And so we've got Elliot back now. Elliot, I'm glad you're able to charge your phone. We have that tendency, Elliot, the Jew and Gentile podcast, to drain people's batteries pretty quick.
We do it all the time.
We were talking about Jordan, Elliot. Can you share about that? I didn't realize how much Iran was influencing Jordanian politics, policy, all of it.
Look, Iran has its tentacles all through the region. And Jordan would be a tremendous asset for them, first of all, because of its geography. If you look at where Jordan sits on the Israeli border, on the Saudi border, it would be a key piece in the jigsaw puzzle of the Middle Eastern map. Mm-hmm. It's a staunch ally of the West, always has been. Here, frankly, not a terribly powerful country. It's got a very good military, but a very small one, so its overall power is limited. But what it does well. And if Iran could somehow neutralize it, that would be a tremendous asset for the Iranians. And here, come back to something I said earlier about strategy. The Iranians are expert strategists. Remember, the Persians invented chess. So they've been playing this game for a couple of thousand years at least. They're thinking long term. I'll put it a different way. As a dictatorship in general, their timetable is very different from the democratic countries. And one of the reasons that democracies are generally poor at strategy, and we're seeing it today with the United States, is because when the world comes to an end every 4 years, you can't think strategically. Mm-hmm. And the American political world is coming to an end in November. What happens, I'm not predicting, I'm not going to get into American politics, but what happens after November is a new world for 4 years, no matter who wins. And that world then ends in 4 years and so on. Ayatollah Khamenei is the heir of Ayatollah Khomeini. In other words, since 1979 till 2024, there have only been two leaders in Iran.
That is amazing.
And we were talking about the fact while you were charging your phone is that their goal, you had mentioned it earlier, is since 1979 has been to influence the Middle East. It's the reason there's a Hezbollah in Lebanon and a Hamas in Israel, and their presence in Syria and their presence in Iraq is because they are trying to take their gospel, their good news of the Islamic faith and their version of it, and to spread it throughout the Middle East, ultimately to bring people back to their way of thinking. So it's really ideological, not just political, but ideological that's being spread throughout the Middle East.
I would say that it's a toxic mix of Islamic radicalism and Persian imperialism. Mm. And we tend to forget that. Khomeini said their goal was to reestablish the Persian Empire. And if it's not clear what that means, open the book of Esther and read the first verse or two.
That's a great point. Hey, one more thing before we let you go. Okay. Let's talk about the Abraham Accords. How are they? Number one, how have they held up since October 7th? How are they holding up today? I've only seen, when you compare the Middle East to 20 years ago, I've only seen a somewhat positive response as a result of the Abraham Accords since October 7th. But I've also heard people say, look, these things are falling apart. What's your take on that?
No, they're not falling apart. Here again, the Abraham Accords are a positive factor. With everything going on, silence on the part of the Abraham Accords members, participants, is positive from our perspective, because our enemies are screaming bloody murder, genocide and all of that against Israel. I understand they're trying to skip through the raindrops of the Arab world on the one hand, and maintaining ties with Israel and the West on the other hand. So their silence doesn't concern me or irritate me. It's a positive thing given what's going on with the rest of them. But they're certainly there. Another factor that we have to keep in account here, and this is part of the American play on things, when America is perceived as weak, and this may be a topic for another discussion or another time, but when America is perceived as weak, the marginal countries like the Emirates, for example, are going to hedge their bets. The Saudis are going to hedge their bets. And hedging their bets means negotiating with the Iranians, playing with the Russians, because what happens if America isn't there to protect us? And it's a lot of perception, but perception counts in decision making.
Well, it reminds me so much of when Alexander the Great was going through the Persian Empire, and the Jewish people had to make a choice when he came through. They had you choose now. You choose my side or you choose the Persian side. People don't realize it when they think about it. Yes, Israel and the Middle East. We have a lot of allies over there, but they're also right in the middle of it all, and they have two directions to go. You can go east or you can go west. It's not an option here. They have to divide.
That's right.
You have to pick either side, and China has had an influence. I mean, they were the ones who helped develop that peace deal between Saudis and Iranians.
Correct. And here, let's keep in mind that preferences are one thing, ideology is one thing, philosophy is one thing, but ultimately, if you're a second or third rate power, you need to pick the winner.
Yep.
I have one more question. I recently saw Tom Cotton, who's a congressman, and he was talking to Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, and he was talking about the aid given to the Gazians. And I saw a statistic that 8 out of 10 Gazians are still pro-Hamas. And he asked this question to the general, who dodged it big time. But here, his question was, would you, back in World War II, would you have given aid to the Nazis? Would you have given humanitarian aid to the Nazis? And he skirted the issue. I think,
of course,
that's exactly what they do. But that whole idea of in the middle of war, how do you handle that? How have the Israelis handled it? I know that they are giving aid. I think it's downplayed here, and they keep saying they don't give enough. They've been opening aid routes a long time.
Look, first of all, something on the order of 300,000 tons of aid has gone into Gaza since the fighting began.
That's amazing.
You don't hear that. That's the problem.
I know. 300,000 tons. That's number one. Number two, this whole story of they're all starving is nonsense, and you can check it yourselves. Look at pictures of people. Now, I'm not saying they're not suffering. I don't want to be misunderstood. People in war are suffering. They're displaced. Many of their homes are destroyed. They've lost their assets. They're living in refugee camps. They're not having a good time of it, and I don't want to poo-poo it. But they're not starving to death either. And if you want to do comparisons, look up pictures of the concentration camps when they were liberated.
Yes.
Compare them to the people you see in today's photographs of Gaza and the people going for trying to get to the food. They're not starving. Do they have enough food? Probably not. Is it being distributed properly? Absolutely not. But let's be straight and honest. Just like the claim of Israeli genocide is nonsense, if the criticism was Israel is using too much force and too many civilians are being killed or injured, well, I don't agree with that, but you'd have to argue that. Genocide, a simple lie. So starvation, a simple lie as well. Last but not least, on the flip side of it, part of our objective in Gaza is to oust Hamas. And if we want to do that, we can't leave an administrative vacuum on the civilian side. What I mean by that is that if we leave it to them to rebuild the civil infrastructure, if we leave it to them to be the distributors of food, they will be back in control very, very quickly. It's up to us to build the civil structure. And here, there are all sorts of bad options. And Patton famously said that the perfect is the enemy of the good. A good plan executed today is better than a perfect plan executed tomorrow. We don't have perfect. We don't even have very good. But anything is better than leaving the field open for Hamas to move back in. So we have an interest. We have an interest in administering it, not ourselves, but in supervising its administration. And in that sense, it's a bit different from the American World War II experience. because let's remember that both in Germany and Japan, when America won, it took over those countries. It destroyed their administrations, administered them with large armies, and with against a population that basically completely surrendered itself to that power. I'm not convinced that we can use the same model in Gaza.
Well, Chris,
Yeah, this was great.
I think it's important. The Bible always says to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We have Elliot here. I know he'd be fine with it. Why don't we you close? Thanks so much, Elliot.
Yep.
Why don't we close in prayer and pray for Israel?
We're going to pray for Israel. Hey, Elliot, too, can you let our listeners know how they can get follow you, follow your knowledge, all of that? Is there a resource they can go to?
At the moment, only on Facebook. Full disclosure, my plan is to begin a podcast immediately after Passover.
Competition.
Okay. I was going to say, we need to start a segment with Elliot called One More Question, where we just keep asking him one more question.
You scratch our podcast.
That's right.
Okay, you got it. We've got a deal.
All right, so we'll people can find you online on Facebook, Elliot Chodoff. We'll put that information up, and then also be looking out for a upcoming podcast after Passover. That's fantastic, Elliot. Hey, Steve, why don't you go ahead and pray, and then we'll say goodbye to our friend.
Our gracious God and Heavenly Father, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we're so thankful for Elliot. We pray for him, his family, the Israelis. We pray for wisdom. As we've heard, solutions seem difficult to find. We pray for a good strategy. We pray that you'll give the War Cabinet the wisdom of Solomon, and ask, Lord, that you'd empower them and strengthen them. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We know that our listeners pray every day, and so we're thankful that Elliot could be here with us. Thank you for the time we've had together. We ask your blessing. Amen.
Amen. Elliot, thank you, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Anytime.
We'll do it again soon, okay? I appreciate you. We'll see you soon.
Take care, Elliot.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
All right, well, Steve, that was fascinating. You know, Steve, when I'm sitting here and I'm listening to Elliot, I didn't expect that response. You know, what I expected him to say was, we got to go into Tehran. We got to get rid of the Ayatollahs. We got to the Shah of Iran, the actual son of the Shah that was deposed in 1979 and exiled. He's waiting in the wings to come in and take over the, Iran again and restore it to its more liberal philosophy and governance. But, that's what I was expecting to hear. But what I heard was, no, not yet. Well, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, it's always easy to govern without consequences.
That's right.
And
From
I don't mean that against Elliot at all. Every action the War Cabinet takes, there's a reaction, and there's pressure coming from all sides. Our tendency, my tendency, you gotta go do something. But I thought he was very reasoned and certainly worth listening to as far as what's the overall strategy. And I thought that Michael Oren was really helpful.
100%.
Too. Those 3 points that he gave to me were just really well thought out. And Chris, I showed you the video of Tom Cotton talking to Lloyd Austin, and I never thought of it that way. They're at war. I understand that, but when Tom Cotton brought World War II in perspective, how did the United States handle it? What did they do during the war? My father served in World War II. There was never any talk about, hey, helping the enemy. We got to feed them.
Yeah.
It was defeating the enemy.
Yeah.
And so we prayed for wisdom of Solomon. They need the wisdom of Solomon. We want them to make the right decisions, and we want peace. But Chris, then there's this thing hanging over us that our 7 listeners I know are thinking. How does any of this play, if at all, into Ezekiel 38 and 39? We always think about it.
Yep.
We've been preaching about Ezekiel 38 and 39, the location of the nations, the geography.
It couldn't be any more lined up right now.
Except for Turkey.
Yes.
Turkey is the only one.
But Turkey it has shown aggression toward Israel.
No, 100%. But right now,
is allied.
everybody's in it except Turkey.
Yeah.
And that's we must be really close. Yeah, I was just talking to a coworker this morning when I got in, and she was befuddled. I was befuddled. How does this play in? What is Israel going to do? How is this region? When is it? Is it before the rapture? Is it after the rapture? That's the number one question of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Not the nations, not what happens, not even who wins. We know all that. When does it happen?
Yeah. And a lot of people, I think, when they understand biblical prophecy, is that we see it happening in the moment that it happens. But you don't think about the fact that it could take years. It could take decades to hundreds of years to actually get to the place where it actually is fulfilled. And the reason I can say that with confidence is because the prophets had promised the coming of Jesus, and it took, think about it, even when Malachi sends us off into the intertestamental period between Malachi and Matthew, it's 400 years
100%.
Between Malachi and Jesus. And so I'm sure they looked around and they said, look at what's going on. We know that they were doing that. The Jewish people had the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they were writing about what was going on politically and religiously among their own people and globally, politically, all these things. They were calculating it. They were trying to put the pieces together, and it took hundreds of years for Jesus to come. So again, we can look at what's going on, Steve, but the reality is that pieces are aligning themselves for Ezekiel 38. And Steve, you had mentioned earlier too, I found this article that I shared with you from Yahoo News, and it was an opinion piece from the Telegraph, which said, the West must remember how to fight. It may already be too late. I think one of the reasons why we have such a hard time in our culture, in the past, in the 1940s, like you said, and even in the First World War, you had an enemy, and that enemy was bent on taking you over, and you had to defeat that enemy, and that was your mission. But see, we live in a world today of modern postmodernism, where everybody has a truth and everybody has a story, and it's true. Everybody does have a story.
Yep.
But the problem is what happens when your enemy's story becomes too compassionate for you to respond? So are you just do you think Iran cares about our story, or do you think Hamas cares about our story or our truth?
They are very focused.
That's right.
They are focused.
The problem is that the West they're looking at what's going on in Israel and in Gaza and Iran, in all these areas of the world, and they're forgetting the fact that the reason they have the luxuries to sit around and to think about these stories or to contemplate and go to these higher learning educations in Ivy League schools is because of what our grandfathers fought for. And now what happens is we're going, poor Hamas. What are you talking about? So it's gotten to a place where this guy's writing an article, or individual is writing an article saying the West must remember how to fight. It already may be too late. And the beginning of the thing says this, the article says, one of the good things about being a citizen of the West is that since the last World War ended in 1945, most men's survival has not been imperiled by the need to go and fight in massive wars. We do not have to kiss goodbye to 10 or hundreds of thousands of beloved friends, sons, fathers, brothers. We have a professional army. We're accustomed to relatively small casualty numbers when that army does go to combat. And bar periodic terror attacks, we are generally able to get on with business of living miserably or prosperily, but living. But it goes on to talk about the fact that we've gotten to this place where we have forgotten how to defend ourselves.
That's very true. And, Chris, forgetting or continuing the way we are is stressed right now. And what your point, are we ready to fight? I have another article here, Chris. It's from the Jerusalem Post. There's a big battle. The Biden administration is trying to win Michigan, and it's trying to appease the large Arab population, especially in Deerfield, the largest Muslim area in the country. And they're forgetting about the Jewish people. And this article...
Really?
Here's what a prominent Reform rabbi to Democrats: don't take Jews for granted. He's liberal. He's Reform. He is his name is Rabbi Hirsch, This came out of the Jerusalem Post. I hope you'll put it in our show notes.
100%.
By scrolling down,
Go
they can
down.
read it. But what he's saying is, don't take for granted that we'll automatically continue to do what we've been doing, because we're seeing rises in anti-Semitism. It seems to be becoming accepted. Many Jewish people are finally at least considering an alternative action to the way they've been doing things. And Chris, your point about war and do we have the stomach for war, I still remember my father saying, if this generation, and he was talking about my generation, the baby boomers, he said, if your generation had to fight the war I fought, we'd lose.
You know, I actually have a way to govern the kind of friends. You know, when you get older, you're not out trying to find you're not finding as many friends. You come to work, you're at church, like you have these pockets,
That's right.
And so anyway, you start thinking about your friends. And the thing I ask myself is this: who's the person that's gonna, stand up with me? Do I want to be am I gonna go down with this guy, or am I gonna try and survive with that guy? I'm joking, of course.
No, I've told you, Chris, the average Jewish person, especially now, but it's always been, you sit next to somebody and you wonder, if things got bad with anti-Semitism, would they turn me in for a bottle of vodka, which happened during World War II, or would they hide me, which also happened? There are people who stood with them, put their lives on the line. How would people react? It's a very good question, and especially amongst Jewish people, but interestingly enough, who's on the front lines? The Jewish people. And who's right behind? Who's the next wave that's going to be attacked? It's Christians.
Yeah.
So, Chris, I signed up for both of them.
You're a double whammy.
I'm in the front lines and then right behind them as well.
Right. If you say I'm Jewish, they're going to say, come with me. I'm a Christian. Don't worry. You can still come with me.
That's right. That's right.
Well, this has been enlightening, and I hope that our guests really enjoyed hearing from Elliot.
He did a great job.
He's so natural. He to get pop right in. He didn't know what we were going to ask him, and so he was able to give us some great insight. I really appreciated his analysis of what was going on over there. But Steve, you have a Yiddish.
We have two words, Chris.
For Yiddish.
Two Yiddish words.
Okay, go ahead.
And we might have done them already, but we have to do them again. Number one, tsuris.
Tsuris.
There's tsuris in the Middle East.
That's right.
Like crazy tsuris. 300 of these launchings, and except for 2 that landed, just an amazing thing. So, great tsuris.
So, wait a minute now, you got to go back. Tsuris means what?
Trouble.
Trouble.
Horrible. Trouble.
That's right.
Terrible trouble. It's troubling and it's trouble.
Tsuris.
How do we counter the tsuris? The Jewish people need seichel. They need seichel. They need wisdom. They need savvy. They need to not just make a decision that seems to make sense. They need to think outside of the box. And we've heard Elliot talk about that. They need seichel.
Yes.
That's what they need. Seichel.
Seichel, and there's tsuris,
In
and
the
they
midst
need
of
seichel.
tsuris.
Steve, I spoke at a church this weekend, and I did Psalm 46, Be still and know that I am God. And that psalm is actually based off of the account when King Hezekiah was surrounded by 185,000 Assyrians. And the amazing thing about that psalm is that it demands us, when you read it, it demands us to position ourselves. We know that God is our refuge and strength. We know that his presence is with us. Therefore, we will not be moved. But it also says, even though the earth shake and the mountains are falling into the sea and the sea is roaring and foaming, which means chaos, even though there's chaos, the first thing that Christian or the follower of God thinks is, no, I'm not going to enter into that chaos. I'm going to have seichel. I'm going to trust and have wisdom that God is in control. He is our refuge and strength, and therefore relax, be still, and know that I am God. So that I hope that our friends and listeners, when they heard Elliot, they don't find themselves in a place of fear. They find themselves in a place of faith.
Look at the Israelis. They did Zumba.
Zumba.
Hey, the airspace is clear. Let's Zumba.
Let's Zumba. Everybody, well, why don't you go ahead and Zumba on over to foiequip.org, and there you can...
there's a guy teaching this week.
I'm not just a guy, the one and only Mr. Steve Herzig, our Jewish sage, is going to be teaching a second class on Romans 9 through 11. Look, a lot of people often argue, hey, the Bible in the Old Testament is done. We've got Jesus now. No, Paul tells us God is not through with his people. You want to find out more information on why God's not through with his people in the New Testament? You got to join Steve's class. That's Romans 9 through 11. You can go to foiequip.org, and there you can register free. Hey, Steve, I'll see you soon.
Take care.